Hello. Today I'm going to be talking to you about developing proposals with a focus on writing for your audience. My name is Lynne Dahmen and I am the Managing Director for the Center for the Environment at Purdue University. I have worked with teams for over 12 years on developing proposals of all sizes and to many different federal agencies. I want to first talk about how we should have an orientation towards your reviewers from the very beginning when you start writing. Knowing who your audience is and how they will be evaluating your work is very important, as this cartoon kind of outlines. There are many hurdles and there's lots of time invested for both you and for the reviewers. So when we're starting to look at and consider opportunities for funding, we of course look to see that we have an idea or a significant problem that needs to be solved. At the same time, you need to match the team working on that problem with your funding agency. It is the next point that's most important. What we'll be talking about here is that how you evaluate who your audience and who your reviewers are going to be. Of course, within the same process, in addition to outlining your problem or your project, you need to demonstrate the appropriate qualifications, resources, and partnerships that are in place that will guarantee success of your project. And as we will be talking about briefly today as well, writing with discipline and structure. As I said, we'll be focusing on point number 3, writing for the right audience today. So I want to briefly talk about who your reviewer or who your audience is. You might imagine kind of a nostalgic idea of a bunch of people sitting around a table congenially and reviewing things, but in fact most reviewers are sneaking in these reading of proposals into a larger frame of a very busy life and schedule just like yours. So often they're being read on trains, on airplanes, while a baby's sleeping, while you're watching a soccer game for your kid, lots of ways and times and places. So the key thing is we want to know what we can know about the reviewer, and always keep in mind we want our proposal to be easily read by that reviewer. So that means we need to think about not only our content, but how we are writing, how we are formatting that proposal to make them happier. We cannot send them a box of chocolates. We cannot talk to them over a beer. So we need to use all of the elements and tools in our toolbox to make it a more pleasurable experience for the reviewer, because they are reviewing not because they love reviewing proposals, but it is part of their service and they are genuinely interested in advancing the work in their field. So who are they and how do they differ? Well, first of all, one of the most fundamental aspects of how you define a reviewer is the agency or the funder. Is it an internal group to that agency who will be evaluating it? Is it an ad hoc committee, maybe one that never actually gets together in person or that proposals are mailed to them? Or maybe as in NIH, we have these standing committees of reviewers over a period of time, and you may actually even know exactly who the reviewers are. In many cases, some of those reviewers are people you know or people just like you. Of course, how those reviewers are chosen also depends on the type of proposal. For example, if it's an industry proposal, you may have volunteers or people who are paid as industry specialists or on topic specialists. They might be volunteers, and they might be reviewers who are looking at just one part of your proposal. For example, the education piece or the broader impacts piece. So you need to make sure to provide enough context that in a different section, if someone only reads that section, that they still understand the role and importance of your proposal overall. Of course, who those reviewers are also depend on the size of the project and the interdisciplinarity of the project. So an NSF regular annual call may have a much smaller group, more specific to your agency, than a large multi-university grant or project. So what does this mean for writing? I am sure you've heard the importance of clarity and organization in writers and writing a proposal, but these are just a few points to keep in mind. I won't read the examples, but these slides are available to you so that you can review them. You want to make sure that the opening of your proposal is accessible to a broader or more appropriate audience. It's very rare that you're just going to be able to dive into the very specifics of your discipline, especially in the opening or for the abstract of your proposal. So make sure that you kind of bring your audience into your proposal and into your problem. Of course, you need to be very aware of your terms for a non-specialist or even for specialists. You're using acronyms. We have a lot of acronyms in science. So not only do you need to define your acronym, but you need to review your proposal for how you are using them and to make sure they're consistent. For example, you don't want to over-explain an acronym multiple times in a proposal. That might happen when you're bringing in sections from different people. You need to review for that. And you need to understand that if you are referring to an agency only once in a proposal, for example, you don't need to even give the acronym if it's never going to be used again or mentioned. So these are the things you want in terms of consistency, because they can slow down your reviewer as he or she is evaluating your work. Another item is being explicit in the goal of a particular part of your proposal. I know I have heard from many writers that the idea is they want not to bore, quote unquote, the reviewer. So they'll not be overly explicit, or they'll reword their goal several times. That is not appropriate for this kind of technical writing in your proposal. It is a great idea to use phrases and kind of guardrails to make sure they know what they're actually going to be receiving in that section or in that paragraph. So summary statements throughout your proposal can be very helpful, because remember, they're not in your brain. And oftentimes you're taking out content to meet page limits. So using short phrases like "this work is significant because," "the team is well qualified because," "the transformational aspects of this work include," those are very clear statements and really do help the proposal reviewer go through your proposal. Other ways are actually in your formatting of your proposal. So make sure that you think about with your team how you're going to organize and how you're going to format things like headings and subheadings. Using headings and subheadings are very useful for organizing the proposal for the reviewer. And if you don't know how to use headings, for example, in Word, you can learn in a few minutes the basics of how to set a particular style, font, and size. Of course, you need to make sure that when you're using these headings that all of the aspects of the heading are following the criteria as described by the funder. Each funder should have a section of a proposal guidelines that outline things like size, font, and even spacing and margins. So make sure that you have that really clearly set, and use traditional section titles as used by various agencies. Some of them will have explicit style guides for sections and some of them may not. But you do want to make sure that you're using the appropriate wording and using the appropriate structure for a particular agency. If you're working with a team, it's often helpful to consider creating a short style sheet. So that would, for example, have a list of acronyms or spellings. So, for example, many terms used in science, in some situations people use a hyphen, and in other situations people don't. So just pick one just to make sure that throughout the whole document it's only used one way. Similarly, you can provide guidance for how you're using italics and bold to make sure it's consistent, so that the reviewer can kind of have a muscle memory when they see something in bold or italics, what that really means. Again, you're probably bringing together writing from several people, and that consistency set out in the beginning can really alleviate a lot of cleanup time at the end when usually you're, pressing against a clock and a deadline. Also, make sure that you consider those style sheets for a particular proposal in terms of rules like how to use URLs. Do you need the first person or the third person? Do you need to avoid a particular reference system? Whatever. Speaking of references, again, it's useful to decide that before you get too deep in it, to make sure that you have one last thing to clean up at the end. So we have spent a few minutes together, and I hope this has been useful for you to review a little bit about how to write your proposals to make your reviewer happy. Thank you very much.